Alright, after this video, day 19. Let's see if the camera will stay here. Stay? Okay. Good enough. Imposition, I think we'll mess with a little bit. The psychology. So, sort of, I don't want to respond directly to videos, but there's been some videos, and they've said some things, and those things provoke thoughts, and so I will kind of go consistent with some of those patterns of ideas. So there's this idea saying, okay, in the end, ultimately, I'll say that life is failed, that it's insufficiently efficient. And the counter argument will be that somebody will say, no, I think it's just fine, I want to do it, or I have a right to, or whatever their argument is. And I've sort of argued that they really can't claim a right unless they can articulate a reason. Okay, I mean, they need a reason. And just saying I want isn't enough of a reason to impose on somebody else. If you're going to impose on somebody else, you have to be doing it for some reason. That's sort of a standard for law in society and a lot of other things. There has to be a reason to incur into somebody's space or into somebody else's welfare, or to compromise it, or to risk it, or to play with it, or to do anything. You sort of have to have a justification. And the justification has to be more than I want, I need. That's really kind of bogus. So yeah, if they can state some other purpose that's reasonable, it's rationally based, well then maybe they have an argument. But I haven't heard that argument. So anyway, again, it's all about this perception thing and the fact that the need always exists inside of a consciousness. The stuff we define as goods are things that preserve or protect conscious welfare, conscious sanity, comfort, pleasure, tricky one, satisfaction, actualization of some mission, some goal. And these ideas, these notions in the head is what they are. They're just notions in the head, and you can sort of say that theoretically you could annihilate the existence of many things, just remove them from human existence, and you wouldn't find any real difference. If you took away one of the baseball teams that existed and they never existed, people wouldn't be sitting around going, something's missing. They wouldn't notice the absence. And you can almost argue in some cases something better might have filled that role or place. Which is a whole nother conversation about where we could be if we weren't stalled by certain things. You could almost argue that Shakespeare might have stalled the creativity because he told all the stories and he told them really well. But he told them all from one kind of frame. And so it might have been better if more people were telling these stories, or these stories arose in some other circumstance separate from this one author. That sometimes monopolies aren't a good thing, I guess. But anyway, let's concede the point that it makes no difference. Yeah, I could certainly argue that I could take some of those stories away and humans wouldn't miss them. They wouldn't sit around and go, there's something missing. It just wouldn't happen. And you could do it through movies. You could do it through a lot of things. You don't sit here saying, well, I guess it's possible for some people to lament the great movies that haven't been made. But that's because they can conceive of them, they can imagine them. So their imagination is sometimes better than the imagination of the people creating movies or financing movies. And so a lot of bad movies get financed because of there being little standards except for what rich people think might be a good idea. That's the standard for what gets made, is what do rich people think might make money. But anyway, another subject also. Yeah. So I've stated that you can find the illusion. You can see that this is an illusion. This preciousness, this thing that makes us cling to our lives or cling to the idea of life, that attaches us to it. That it is made out of no real substance. Because when we test ourselves, when we test why we don't care about certain things, why we don't care about not cute animals, for example, as much or even at all. It's hard to care. And you can understand kind of that there's psychology here, that this isn't philosophy anymore. This isn't a rational judgment that it's an intuitive one created by your psychology, by your conditioning, by associations and attachments. It has nothing to do with the real character of the thing. I mean, it can be argued that in many ways a laboratory mouse or rat is incredibly active consciousness, very conscious, very alive, very vulnerable, very controlled by feelings and emotions. It certainly is as substantive as almost primates. I mean, it's hard to make a distinction and say mice aren't incredibly like squirrels. They test them in countries because they're just so creative in terms of finding ways around obstacles you place in their way. Very active brain, and yet we can have pure functional knowledge that they're being, in mass numbers, tortured in laboratories every day. Now, if they were little monkeys or little chimpanzees, we'd say that's wrong, that's incredibly stupid, that's crazy, don't do that, stop that, that's evil. Or even if they were kittens, but it's all this, it's this subjective crap. It doesn't have any, it loses integrity, I guess is what I'm saying. The concept, and the concept of life being precious in terms of having to exist loses its validity when you recognize that you don't miss Martian civilization, you don't miss Venetian civilization. These things don't, it doesn't even occur to you to say how void your life is or how empty the universe is, because it doesn't have these other civilizations chasing their Cheetos, doing the same nonsense you're doing, chasing their desire, the satisfaction of their desire. And I pointed out in another video, that we can't even obtain our satisfaction in any realistic way without sort of using other people, using their comfort to make our comfort. It's really hard to be purely beneficial, productive in your interactions with the rest of the world. You're often taking more than you're giving, and that's the nature of the game, and yet people perceive it as like somehow we are accomplishing something, and that there's even value in the worst of circumstances, which again I can't rationally make sense of. That it's all sort of relative. You could argue that slaves, if they just changed their attitude, if they got rid of their bad attitude, it wasn't so bad. We can always just lower the standard. We can always find something worse to compare something to and say, well, you should be happy with what you have, or some kind of nonsense like that. These are all just psychological games to move the goalpost, to change what would be a rational description of the circumstance. I mean, we can understand addiction when other people have it, and yet we won't concede our own. We can see insensible attachment in other people, and obsession and stupidity, and it's a lot harder for people to turn the lens of their own perception onto their own behavior and recognize that what they're doing is the same thing, that they're being defensive, that they're preserving. It's like the religious people who fight gay marriage or something, and these are people who have nothing against gays. They don't even know any, they don't interact with any, they don't even, it has nothing to do with them whatsoever. They just don't want God to be disrespected. And so they'll say, no, marriage is sacred because it's God's word. And that's all it's about. They're not fighting for any principle. They're fighting they're out of defensiveness, just to preserve their perception, the world's perception of them as a fool or an idiot for believing in a God that can't even keep his marriage sacred in this state. That's all it is. It's a defense of their dogma. It's a defense of a philosophy, of a perception of a kind, of their authority, the authority of God. And so they'll fight laws that only because they strike at the reasonableness and authority and popularity, let's say, of their God notion. It's like they want the popularity written right into the law. They want that God we trust crap on the money, because it validates their philosophy. That's how silly they are. They believe that. They believe that that's where you gain credibility. How you gain credibility. No, this really went different than I intended. So the point is that people perceive the necessity of our continuation only as a psychological experience. It's not really an intellectual one, because you can't intellectually come up with the reason. All right, it is just a chase. It's a chase that's already been done. We've been there and done that. Like the Shakespeare play, we just keep reliving the same dramas over and over and over and over again. We know that they deteriorate with time, that most of the people having kids are usually young and stupid. That's why they're doing it, because if they were older and wiser, they'd probably be more grateful not to be burdened, and not to be a burden, not to create, and they've seen enough of the risk, they've seen enough of the outcomes to know that it's too high a risk, that it's too high a price to pay for the superficial joys. You can go back to these entertainment experiences, but yes, something entertains you for a little while, and then it wears down, it wears off, its value diminishes, and you're looking for something a little better, or a little different, or a little something. It's a very corrosive but necessary part of our psychology, in the sense that it has to maintain a level of dissatisfaction. This dissatisfaction keeps us moving. It keeps us wanting for more. I mean, you have to create more. You have to create the idea of more for something to strive for it. And we're built to strive for our survival, to optimize it, to maximize it. That's the evolutionary history. Isn't leisure time, sit around, contemplate. No, it's be in the game, fighting for your existence and fighting for the existence of your DNA spawn. And that's the game we've been playing for billions of years. And that's our psychology. And that's really the only game in town, is create the illusion of a need so you can chase it. Create the idea that you need something, and create it in your psychology, and then you will chase it. And as most chasers know, sometimes having isn't as good as chasing. It's, you want to maybe delay the having, because you know once you do it, once you get it, you're probably going to want something else. Something else will just, like a Pez dispenser, the next bit of crap will pop up, and you will be obliged to chase it. Alright, yeah, it didn't go exactly where I wanted to go with this, but it's all this perception. There's only these 10 little thoughts, or 10 ideas, or 10 principles, or 10 notions of truth that distinguish one person from another in terms of dramatically different philosophies. They're not allowed to go where other people go because they believe in evolution, or they believe that 2,000-year-old stories of reality are not very credible, that it would be silly for you to take anything 2,000-year-old and read it as if it's something that hasn't been perverted, that's lost all its credibility. 2,000-year-old eyewitness testimony, you can't trust eyewitness testimony that happened yesterday. Witnesses pretty much suck. What else? Yeah, so that's the thing, though. It's just perception. So you perceive it as a valid, meaningful chase, or you recognize that the chase is dangerous, expensive, and that it's disproportional and unfair and undeserved in how it apportions profit and loss. You don't get what you earn. You just get what you get. and it's logically nonsensical to validate a system like that. Anybody who has a little bit of intelligence understands concepts like fairness and consent, and a system that doesn't include those elements is almost a non-starter. It's a non-starter for any game you're going to create, that you're going to create random victory, undeserved victory. Who would play a game like that? No, sorry. No, I guess people do play lotteries. But that's just people are idiots. So enough said, right? Who am I talking to? Idiots. Yeah, unfortunately. But anyway, again, another perception, a perception of some sort of hopeful, realistic opportunity, like they're gonna go through that door. They don't think they're going to get hit by a meteor, but they think they're going to win a lottery that has 3 times the odds of getting hit by a meteor. I mean, sorry, does that make any logical sense? No. Is it a psychological phenomenon? Yes. People invest in preposterous hope. They should just admit that. Just admit that they're preposterously owned by their psychology, and that their psychology is nonsense and idiotic, and that any time they allow their psychology to own their philosophy, they've done a bad thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's just plain stupid. It makes you stupid. If you're going to let your psychology own your philosophy or own your intellect, you're going to be stupid, because your psychology is fundamentally stupid. Yeah, that's about enough. Okay, till next time.